Hello, everyone. I'm Runa Ray, a fashion designer and environmentalist, and it gives me great pleasure to host this virtual side session on fashion and the oceans. So, we will be discussing how responsible fashion can be effective in cleaning up our oceans to protect and conserve marine coasts and lands through the use of indigenous knowledge and educating the consumer. We will also be speaking with Mr. Vincent Doumeizel, who is a part of the Safe Seaweed Coalition, and I have collaborated with him where we've made garments using seaweed to print. So that's coming up much later. The entire program is going to be pretty interactive in the sense of there's going to be a mix of videos to show what fashion activism is all about and to also show you how I have used fashion to educate the consumer and get the youth involved. The ocean has often been our ally in addressing climate change, and it has taken the brunt of human made global heating. There is an urgent need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and limit the scale of climate change that impacts the ocean. And of course, increase resilience and impacts to the ecosystem and the livelihoods that depend on it. Fashion has also contributed largely towards human made global heating. In the sense of fashion has contributed to 20% of the global wastewater. Now, you would say that this is mostly fresh water, but at the end of the day, everything ends up in the ocean. Even when you're having garments that are in landfills, you have the dyes that seep out of the fabrics over time, get into the groundwater, and that enters the ocean. So, this session will focus on nature based solutions, like I said, activism. You'll see a lot of videos, and of course, it'll help increase ocean and coastal zone awareness, resilience, and to discuss fashion and its current state, the current risks for climate change, and its future risks. It also offers a space for enhancing and strengthening learning and discussing a way forward to strengthen ocean and climate adaptation, and of course, mitigation action. I would also like to engage people in the process, in the creative process of fashion for the oceans by engaging designers, industry stakeholders to explore and invest in creative methods of garmenting, revive ancient indigenous techniques to help bridge the gap between science and design, and of course, invest in the three R's and use the power of art and fashion to create awareness, educate, and advocate for policy change. Saying which, fashion is one of the largest platforms that one can actually use in terms of activism because it is a universal language that is understood by all. And its processes are directly linked to the health of our oceans, from its ideation to manufacture and transport. Fashion's impact has been seen the world over, basically. And fast fashion, as we know, has caused the devastation that we must now try to heal. And it is through activism that we can help the public understand what impact their clothes have on the environment and what can be done to mitigate that. Now, there are different ways that I've actually worked on activism. I've actually worked with garments where I've used actual seaweed, cyanobacteria, created garments out of it, got the public to question why would you make something out of seaweed? Why would you make something out of cyanobacteria? But this is the questioning that is required for the public to understand that there could be a future in this material that has been used. You could probably not wear it the way it is, but seaweed, when mixed with cellulose, can actually form textile and fabric. So fashion has one of the largest outreaches, and fashion as activism has the ability to reach the masses and the youth and engage them to take care of the oceans. Saying which, I would like to share with you some clips of fashion as activism. hope you enjoyed watching that little clip that spoke about fashion as activism. And you saw that I had garments that had words that said, imagination is the only weapon against reality. I also had these three pieces of garments that said, the faraway tree, and that denoted the burning forests in the Amazon, because in the fashion industry, we are clearing up space, clearing up agricultural land, and making space for commercial crops, especially for fast fashion. And we need not see the last tree standing, falling down. So moving forward, I'd like to also speak about another very important subject when it comes to the United Nations Ocean Conference and water, especially because roughly 17 to 20% of the industrial wastewater pollution is because of fabric dyes and treatments. And it is estimated that 8,000 synthetic chemicals are used to bleach, treat, and brighten our clothes. Modern day textile industries, with their printing and dyeing, are detrimental to the oceans. And most indigenous communities hold intimate place-based knowledge, which are gained across generations. Now, this is an ideal starting point for addressing the contemporary challenges that exist right now, such as biodiversity loss, land degradation, climate change, and of course, water wastage and water pollution. And in the end, all of it is directly related to the oceans. So I believe that ancient techniques in printing can help mitigate water wastage and pollution, including that using of natural resources such as the sun to print that can evade harmful dyes from entering our oceans. So how does this actually happen? Again, I'm going to share with you a video of a process which is not very new, but it was practiced in the 12th century in the royal courts of Japan. And the recipe was stolen into Europe. So basically, you had a trough of water upon which you had inks that was splashed, because there was a secret ingredient in the water that made it really viscous. So the inks stayed on the surface of the water. So while the ink stayed on the surface, one had to just take the fabric and lay it on the surface, and the inks would transfer themselves onto the surface of the fabric. This kind of printing is called the art of water printing. And since the dye bath is so viscous, you can actually draw patterns on the surface. So you can, and then you transfer the patterns directly onto the fabric. So when we did this, we found out that using just 50 liters of water, we could dye 150 meters of fabric. This technique was also taught to certain coastal communities, this indigenous way of printing, and we made clothes. So you will see the garments, you will see the techniques, and you will also see how important it is to start cultivating these kind of cottage industries across communities and get them into the fashion environment. So please watch the next video. Thank you. question that I constantly get asked is, how can fashion directly help coastal communities? I know we're teaching them these techniques, and the mostly we have women involved in carrying out these processes, but is there any other alternative way of finding an income, especially when it comes to marine debris? So if you look at it, most coastal communities, especially in developing nations, are largely impacted with climate change and commercial fishing practices. Now, we have a lot of discussions in fashion, especially how could fashion be instrumental in providing stability and help coastal communities in a new trade. What I have found is that reviving old ghost fishing nets has been something which a lot of communities have been involved with, especially with nonprofits. So, because abandoned fishing gear has become a global problem, and the Food and Agriculture Organization and even UNEP estimates 640,000 tons of such abandoned nets that are spread across the world's oceans, and they comprise to a staggering 10% of the ocean litter. So collecting these nets by coastal families is number one. Now, what do you do with these nets? Well, you do have certain organizations that are recycling them, making them back into yarn. But at the end of the day, I believe in the fashion industry that you need to own your process, right? So if you create something, you also need to own what you're going to do with it. Now, getting the fishing nets, recycling them into plastic is great, but where are you recycling it? Now, there's not all plastic can be recycled. And in fact, National Geographic came up with this percentage that only 9% can be recycled, because plastic is made up of various polymers, and not every polymer can be recycled the same way. But using marine debris the way it is and repurposing them or upcycling them could be another alternative that we have introduced into the fishing communities. So what we do is we actually take these ghost fishing bags, we clean them up, and some of them have a very rustic look. We let them be. We get some very pretty handles, but then we make fruit bags out of it. We make some really fashionable bags that could be introduced back into the fashion industry. And when people look at it, they realize that, yes, this is a ghost fishing net that has been made into a shopping bag. So it basically does a few things. It gives new economy to the coastal community. It creates a purposeful product without actually breaking the product down into another form, but using the same form, but upcycling it. And of course, it removes the requirement for single-use plastic or disposable bags. All this comes down to actually community engagement, where we, the people, are responsible for oceans and the planet, and where small changes that we make can go towards caring of our clothes, and of course, the choices that are important for the well-being of our oceans. The using of the 3 R's, which is super important, like the reduce, reuse, and recycle. And how can we basically practice the 3 R's? So synthetic materials such as polyester, acrylic, nylon, they represent 60% of the clothing material worldwide. And out of this 60%, the most used is polyester. And these man-made materials are highly popular and usually chosen by the fashion industry because of the availability, durability, resistance, and affordability. Now, you do have a lot of garments that are made in polyester and which need to be made in polyester, especially outdoor garments. But there is also a certain amount of education that needs to be given to the consumer when they buy a product of this sort. Because when manufactured, washed, and worn, clothes that are made of synthetic materials lose tiny fibers that end up in the environment. And we all know about microfibers, right? And microplastics. So when this ends up in the environment, it just doesn't biodegrade. It fragmentizes into smaller pieces. And then these smaller pieces break down even finer into microfibers, which are less than 5 mm and are not even visible to the naked eye. So when we were at the beach cleanup at the Youth Innovation Forum, we found so much of plastic that the youth had collected in just a matter of an hour. But what is interesting is that microfiber is not visible to the naked eye, and it also is in the sand that we are on. We are literally eating, drinking, and shedding microfibers ourselves. Plastic particles are also washed off from products such as synthetic clothes, and they contribute to 35% of the primary plastic that is polluting our oceans. So every time we do our laundry, on an average, or we have an average of 9 million microfibers that are released into the wastewater treatment plants that cannot filter them. The only thing is simple changes in our lifestyle and daily actions, including the knowledge that we communicate to our peers, can go a long way in saving our oceans. So I would like to again share with you another video that speaks about cyanobacteria. Now, cyanobacteria is known to be one of the living fossils. They've even found cyanobacteria on Mars. And in fact, NASA is thinking about how they use cyanobacteria mats to generate energy, or to even, have life form that grows out of it. So I found cyanobacteria on the shores in California. And this interesting algae has the potential for the future of textile, same as seaweed. The beauty with cyanobacteria is that it's fire resistant. I can challenge anyone to try to light up cyanobacteria. You'll be struggling because it is fire resistant. And at the end of the day, it is extremely water absorbent. If we have the right technology and we get to create a yarn, we can definitely see garments being made out of cyanobacteria. So please take a look at my process as to how I made these garments of activism, again, using cyanobacteria that were collected off the shores, to show people that there is an alternative to cotton. Cotton doesn't have to be the primary crop when it comes to commercial fibers. There are other avenues that can be discovered, like bioplastics, cyanobacteria, and seaweed. So please take a look. Another Another subject that I like to stress upon, especially when we're talking about the United Nations Ocean Conference, is that every action has an opposite and equal reaction. Um, But at the same time, you have a thesis and you have an antithesis, and then you need a synthesis. The reason I'm saying this is because when we talk about ecotourism, which people are kind of promoting, which I thought was a very, very good idea, until I read this one article that came out in Stanford that spoke about the promotion of ecotourism, which came with a lot of people with the intent of good, right? But that also brought with them sunscreen. And sunscreen carries with it this one chemical which is called oxybenzone, which apparently turns into a deadly toxin that is activated by light, and it basically kills young corals and the bleached corals and the old ones. The algae that are living in the corals kind of absorb the toxin and blunt the damage, but it is still researched, but it has also been shown that corals are affected by oxybenzone. So even in fashion, while we are working towards solutions, it is important for us to look at the larger picture. It might be good at the moment, but at the moment is not right. If we are looking at 2030, we need to widen our vision to 2050 and see how we can create collaborations across sectors, scientific sectors, design sectors, students, youth, education, get everyone involved and not keep processes a secret, because at the end of the day, that is what is causing all the problem. It is important to be transparent. It is important to tell people where you're recycling your plastic, for example. Are you recycling it? Are you collecting the plastic in the US and recycling it in the US? Or are you collecting the plastic in the US and then giving it to Turkey to recycle it, where people cannot actually see what is happening to the people who are recycling it? Is it causing them environmental damage, environmental racism? Is it causing a lot of toxins in the air? We don't know that because we don't get to see it. So if we own our processes in fashion, if we believe in nature-based solutions, if we explore ancient indigenous knowledge, this is the way forward and we will not fail. And last but not the least, it is a collective industry. The industry is like an onion. You have several layers that contribute towards the term fashion, which is, beautifully bound by this skin of glamour. But at the end of the day, there cannot be any sort of opacity when it comes to these layers. And if you have layers that are spoiled, that would automatically spoil the other layers, because that's how it is. You cannot have one bad apple without spoiling the rest. So I hope that in the future we would have more transparency in the industry. There would be a lot more stakeholders involved. There should be a lot more investment when it comes to design-led processes, because design is where we have gotten now, and this is how we have gotten that far. We need the collaboration between design and science, and of course, a lot more events like the United Nations Ocean Conference. And last but not the least, before I end this discussion, I would like to speak about this one project which we have, which is called the Peace Flag Project. The Peace Flag Project was started in 2019 with the Act Now campaign of the United Nations, and it basically spoke about upcycling fashion's waste for a social cause. Because as a fashion designer, I believe that we cannot have environmental justice without social justice. So the Peace Flag speaks about how one can commit to peace and why it is important to have peace, especially in times like this during climate change. Because when we have climate change, it also causes a lot of unrest. And a lot of unrest causes widespread refugee crisis, because you'll have people who are migrating from countries. So what we do is that we work with fashion's waste, like your old t-shirts, your old bed sheets, your old pillowcases. We go to schools, we go to prisons, we speak to them about fashion, about climate change, how we could help mitigate that, the people behind making the clothes. Once you have learned from these workshops as to where your garments actually come from, how it contributes to water wastage, the dyeing industry, the pollution that it causes, it automatically makes you a responsible person. We end it by having commitments that are then written on these t-shirts or bed sheets that are cut up into canvases. The canvases are like 10 inches by 10 inches. We then collect the canvases, which have artworks, which have words, which have sentences, and then signed by the person who created it. We have garnered around 10,000 submissions of the sort. The submissions are then, the tiles, basically the canvases, are then sewn to form a large flag. These flags are then exhibited the world over. So we had an exhibition at the City Council of Half Moon Bay in California. We also were involved with the United Nations for the Youth Day for Peace. And we signed up with San Quentin, which is one of the largest prisons in the United States, and the only prison that holds death row inmates. So this project is a global project. It was involved with the Barcelona Peace Festival last year, and it connects 193 countries. If you would like to be a part of this project, please do get in touch with me on peace-activism.org. And you can also personally email me at contact@runare.com. So I would love to hear from you and, of course, impart the knowledge and get social commitments that create larger commitments. I would like to now move to my conversation with Mr. Vincent Doumeizel, who heads the Safe Seaweed Coalition. He's also spearheading the seaweed revolution. And I had the pleasure of working with him and meeting him in 2019 at the United Nations Ocean Preparatory Meet. And so please take a look at our discussion where we speak about seaweed, how it is responsible for the environment, the crossover of food and fashion, and of course, involving women in the entire process. Thank you. Speaker is Mr. Vincent Doumeizel, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. He is a very passionate individual. He is in the forefront of the seaweed revolution. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Vincent. This was at the UN Ocean Conference, where he had the manifesto and he gave it to me, and you will hear a lot about him. But before I start, I'm going to probably read his bio. So Mr. Vincent is the senior advisor for the ocean for the United Nations Global Compact. He's the director of the food programs, Lloyd's Register Foundation. With 20 years of experience in the food industry, Vincent is now the senior advisor at the United Nations Global Compact on Oceans, as well as the director for the food program for the Lloyd's Register Foundation. Vincent leads the charitable objectives of the foundation through the funding of innovative projects to support the food supply chain, partnering with the UN, FAO, the World Bank, WWF, universities, NGOs, and large brands. Vincent has led and released the Seaweed Manifesto in a call to scale up the seaweed industry in order to address some of the world's most important challenges: hunger, global warming, pollution, poverty. Vincent is now co-leading the first international platform for the seaweed stakeholders, the Safe Seaweed Coalition. He is also the UN Global Compact lead contact for the UN Food Systems Summit. So I have a few questions for you. For those who don't know, you've been in the forefront of the seaweed revolution, and you've also released the Seaweed Manifesto. I would like you to tell us a bit about the Safe Seaweed Coalition and how you plan to actually solve these pressing problems, which are like global, which is global warming, hunger, pollution, and of course, poverty. So please, Mr. Wasser, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. It's always a pleasure to work with you, Runa. And I so appreciate your work. So it's an honor for me to be here speaking with you. First of all, I will not solve. We will solve the problem of this generation, and it can only be all together. And when I say all together, that the basic objective of this coalition that we have set up is to get together. But let me step back a bit maybe and give some perspective about what is the potential of seaweed. Well, actually, seaweed has quite an unlimited potential. I think there are so many different types of seaweed. First, we know at least 12,000 types of seaweed, and we have learned to cultivate. We have domesticated only 10 or 20 of them at the maximum. The total surface, the total area where seaweed production is possible is around 66 million square kilometers. And today we are cultivating less than 2,000 square kilometers out of 66 million. So, I mean, we are nowhere. And I keep saying the same, we are in the Stone Age. We moved from prehistory to modern history when we stopped being hunters-gatherers back 12,000 years ago and became farmers. And civilization, it's all about farming. It's all about managing the ecosystem. To produce more and to make sure it is regenerative. We have not done that for the ocean so far. We are nowhere in the ocean. We are just dumping our waste in the ocean. And then opportunistically, we are trying to hunt, or we call that fishing, or gather wild seaweed. In the meantime, we are destroying this ecosystem. And to talk about sustainable ocean now is a bit irrelevant to me, because when you have destroyed over 50% of the biodiversity in an ecosystem, you're not talking about sustainability. You're not talking about preserving. You are talking about restoring, regenerating, and that's where we are. And if you look at the ecosystem in the ocean, seaweed is the basic. It's the lowest trophic. So seaweed, dissolved seaweed, will feed the lowest trophic level, phytoplankton, filters, and so forth. And then they will, this one will feed small fish or bivalves, and they will then feed big fish, and so forth. So that's why it's important. First of all, we are in the Stone Age, and seaweed is the really basic of the ocean. What is the potential of seaweed? Unlimited, actually, because I mean, seaweed can be a source of food. I mean, very, very nutritional food, very, very important. A lot of fatty acids, of iron, of proteins, more than anything else. A lot of vitamin B12, vitamin C, vitamin K, and zinc, and so forth, and low fat, and very good stuff for all of us. Can be a source of feed. Can be with a lot of interesting side effects, like increased immune resistance of the animal, lower the need for antibiotics, or decrease the methane emission by quite large, which is a big problem for greenhouse gas in the world. Seaweed can also be a source of biostimulants. So increase the resistance of the plant. It can be a source of biopackaging, of textile, of medicines. We can do many different things with seaweed. We can restore man's sight. Actually, they manage to do that. So there's an unlimited number of innovation. It can also sequester carbon, and actually that's the only food or only resource that has a negative impact, because while it grows, it sequesters in the ocean because it's losing skin, it's losing cells, just like we are doing with our skin. It's losing cells while it grows, and these cells are carbon that are sunk in the ocean for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So as such, it is a negative emission product, which is very rare. It cleans the ocean, it protects the shores because it limits the erosion of the shore. It supports livelihood, notably women. We see that in emerging countries, mostly women are benefiting from seaweed, and we see a large majority of women involved in the seaweed supply chain, even in developed countries, which is totally an exception in the world of the ocean. But if you look at fishermen, I'm not sure you will find a lot of fisherwomen, actually. So that's quite interesting in terms of gender parity and women empowerment. So the big question that comes next is, why is it not happening already? Why is it not there already? I mean, there's so many problems that it can address. And the main question, I think, is the lack of coordination and the lack of collaboration. So that's why we have funded with the Lloyd Register Foundation, with the UN Global Compact. We have funded the first ever global coalition for seaweed, so Save Seaweed Coalition. You can all register for free there. If you are interested to know more about seaweed, to exchange with others, saveseaweedcoalition.org. Just register there. It's free. You can display what you're doing. You have an interactive tool. And the idea is really, I mean, of course, we will fund some project on this coalition. We'll fund some project to improve standards, safety standards for the product, for the environment, and for the workers in this supply chain. Not that it is dangerous or unsafe. The thing is that there's no consistency in terms of standards, and that is preventing the scale up of this industry. And it's not consistent because there is no one voice to speak on behalf of the seaweed industry. And here we are. I mean, we want to speak for this voice and say we need consistent standards. We need consistent regulation in order to scale up. And then we can start to think about how to scale up the production, how to ease permitting, how to raise awareness by population about all the fantastic things you can do about seaweed, educate people, eat more seaweed, use seaweed for textile, use seaweed for many different things. But the basic thing is standardized regulation, because if you don't have this, then your product, you cannot just put your product on the market. And once again, there's a lot to do on this. So that would be the first step. But you can get a lot of seaweed. You can eat a lot of seaweed, use a lot of seaweed already. There are fantastic projects. There's a real momentum. Jeff Bezos granted $100 million to support seaweed. There's a huge project in West Africa for Southwest Africa for $65 million. There's a lot of investors that are looking to invest into seaweed. They are also looking for direction, who I could speak with if I want to invest in seaweed. They had no partner to do that. Here we are as well. We want to be the one to speak with the investors and tell them, well, you can invest there, you can invest there, you can invest here, and so forth. That's our objective, is to represent this very, very nascent seaweed industry. And I'm not talking in that example for the North Asia, for the Asia. I mean, because in China, Korea, Philippines, and so forth, they are quite educated and quite in advance. They are producing a lot of seaweed, 30 million tons of seaweed, fast growing business there. But in the rest of the world, in the South Asia and in the rest of the world, we are totally in the Stone Age. We are in the prehistory. So we need to move to civilization of the ocean. We need to reconnect our land with our ocean.
Yeah, it's true. Seaweed is definitely one of those mysteries that connects medicine, nutrition. It's important for the climate. And I just got off one of your talks with the World Chef, and I still remember you saying that it's a kelp forest. It's not, and the difference between the plant, the seaweed plant, and the seaweed. Correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, the sea plants are there are some sea plants that are growing in the shore, and they are not seaweed, because the seaweed doesn't have any roots, doesn't have any flowers. So, but you have some plants that are growing near shore. So there's still a confusion. But more importantly, I think a strong message to deliver is that seaweed is absolutely an appropriate name. It's not weed. It's nothing to do with weed. It can grow up to 30 centimeters a day, up to 60 meters. You can feed people with this. It can have many different tastes. It is a wide diversity of organisms. The difference between a green seaweed and a red seaweed is bigger than the difference between a fungi and an elephant from a genetic point of view. That amplifies the number of applications that you can do with this. So let's call them sea vegetables, because we need to speak about feeding people with them. Let's talk about sea forests, because they are protecting biodiversity. They are sequestering carbon by large. And when you have organisms which are 60 meters high, it's not weed, it's a forest. And then maybe people will think about protecting the forest or reforesting, just like we do with our land and with our forests on land. We need to, because seaweed are endangered at the moment. They are disappearing very fast because of biodiversity problems, because of ecosystem disruption. They are disappearing by large, and in California, which was a big forest, of seaweed there, 80% of the kelp are gone. They have disappeared. And then there you just have desert because there's nothing there. And when you think about it, I mean, this ocean ecosystem, it contributes to 50% of the oxygen we breathe. So if we lose this ocean biodiversity, we might be in big trouble.
Absolutely. And I also want to kind of take away from what you just mentioned in your just like few minutes earlier, where you said that women are also being benefited by this, because we know, like with the SDGs, you have SDG 5, which is gender equality.
Absolutely.
And you also have a big problem when it comes to disparity, especially when it is also with the coastal communities. Number one, facing challenges because of commercial fishing practices, and at the same thing with the women. So how does this industry, the seaweed industry or the seaweed revolution, also help revolutionize women's lives?
Well, it's quite straightforward actually, because the thing is that the seaweed business is usually done by the fisherman's wife. So the fishermen, they go at sea and but there's no fish left actually. They are overfishing. If we would give all the subsidies in the world, I think subsidies in the world for fishermen are 20 billion per year. So we give 20 billion a year to pay people for overfish and to extinct species, which is, let's give them to those women who are working in the seaweed business. And the thing is that the fishermen are trying to fish, but they have no revenue out of it. So the fisherman's wife, they are actually, because seaweed doesn't need any investment. You just put ropes on the ocean. You don't need any specific training. You don't need to be literate. And actually, unfortunately, a lot of women in emerging countries are illiterate, which is quite a problem as well. So, but you don't need many knowledge to you just need to put these ropes. You put some seeds. It grows again and again. In Tanzania, for instance, and you don't need to reseed. It grows again. You harvest. It grows again. It grows again, and then you just let it dry on the beach. Because and once it is dry, you can keep them for months. So it's a very simple business with very limited investment and very limited training required. So, and once again, it's easy for fishermen who are losing their revenues to ask their wife to do this, and that's how it happened actually. And now, once again, in Tanzania, you have 80 to 90% of the revenues that are going to women. We're not talking only about women collecting seaweed on the beach. We are talking about all this processing part and about all this academic part. I mean, the head of the cluster in Flower Msuya is the head of the cluster industry for seaweed in Tanzania. It's a woman, and even in the rest of the world, there's an amazing number of women who are CEOs of seaweed companies. And I was at a call the other day, and there was 8 panelists, and I was the only male actually there. And there were 7 women with me. They were all CEOs and so forth. And the main conclusion of this panel session was to create a network of female which are in charge for seaweed development, and we would call them the she-weed, And I think that's in progress. I mean, I maybe they proposed me to be the only honorary male to be part of this panel, but I'm not sure if I should accept this. But anyway, I think they are there. But I think it's interesting, yeah, really, because de facto, I mean, you have a large majority of women who are working in this industry.
Yeah, very interesting. It reminds me of when we met at the United Nations for the Ocean Conference, and I had this sustainable line that I came up with. And the funny thing is that I actually employed only women who learned the technique, which mitigated water pollution and water wastage. So, and I used seaweed, and you told me it was seaweed. So it was a great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was a great connection. That brings me to my next question. I have shared with you some of the seaweed dresses that were made, which were made by this one particular seaweed. And we've also heard that there's kind of distrust when it comes to biomass or biomaterials used. And how do you plan to break through with this, especially with the connection with food and fashion? Because we know that seaweed can also be processed made into textiles. But generally, how do you break the mindset of people to understand that not all biomass is bad, but it can also be used for the good for the environment?
Well, I think that that's exactly what we want to convey as a message. I mean, so far, if you look at this industry in Tanzania, in Philippines, and in Southeast Asia, we see that they are only using seaweed for the carginum, and they waste the rest of it. While it's full of nutrients, it's full of interesting polymers, it's full of interest. So the next step for us is to be able to have biorefinery who can really split the various compounds so we can valorize each of them. So we can really have a resource that will be once again regenerative, because while it grows, seaweed restores biodiversity. So it's regenerative as such. And then if you harvest it, you can split it in various compounds, notably in textile, because it has interesting polymer for textile. And then valorize it in a different way and then the farmers, the women, they have more money. Another project in Namibia who is expected to do that. I mean, exactly. It's the largest seaweed farm. I mean, it's not yet there, but they are planning to open in Namibia the largest seaweed farm in the world, hundreds of hectares. Actually, it will sequester as much carbon as the entire emission of the Netherlands. Actually, when it will be up and running full scale, and the biomass that will be produced there will be for textile and functional food mostly, and a bit for fertilizers. So it's a great source, and art is so important. I mean, because why? Because we need to convince people that seaweed is really cool. It's something really good. It's a fantastic food, but it has other properties. It's not the slimy, smelly, and unsexy thing that you walk into when you are at the beach. That's much more than this. It has a lot of properties. I mean, it's time to get over this feeling that it's and art is the only way to do that. Art is so good at telling stories. I mean, I'm fully convinced about all. I mean, I'm into art as well. I'm a musician, and I'm fully convinced about the power of that. Unfortunately, we have not yet design guitars in using seaweed, but I'm sure we will find a way. But I think art is a fantastic way to tell stories, to show people that what they first perceive as something invasive, dangerous, and smelly and salty can be something really, really cool and really good. And I think that's why it's so important, the work that you are doing, and that's why I'm so glad to support you, because I mean, promoting that. And I don't have it with me, but I keep displaying some during my talk. Normally, I'm displaying some piece of things looks like wood, or like things which look like plastic glasses, and they are all made of seaweed, and that is so powerful to display this kind of polymer or this kind of object. Because that's really convincing. People see, wow, that's made of seaweed, but that looks like wood. That looks like, and this piece of this building brick that is made out of seaweed is 3 times stronger, harder than oak, actually. So it can really be interesting. So there are so many different uses, and I think the work you're doing with textile is such a fascinating work, and I think there's a lot to do into that. And we are at the very, very beginning. For art, for fashion, but even to replace textile, we know that cotton is a very unsustainable production. We know it needs a lot of pesticides, a lot of water, and so forth. So let's stop using cotton. I mean, we've got a lot of seaweed to grow, so let's do it.
I completely agree, and I do not think seaweed is unsexy or slimy. I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever come across. And thanks to you, I've learned so much from you and everyone who's listening. The most enigmatic person, Mr. Vincent. I've learned so much about seaweed. And if you want to learn more about seaweed, please get into the safeseaweedcoalition.org. My other question, since I'm a fashion designer, I have to ask you this. And I do a lot of activation, right, to kind of get people to be engaged with, to understand products like seaweed and how it can actually help people and the environment. I would like to hear from you. What were the thoughts that came into your mind when you saw the collection? And what is to you the connection between fashion and food?
Well, I mean, fashion or I mean, getting dressed is and food is one of the basic needs that we have. First of all, I mean, we need to get warm and we need to get fed. That's what we need. So that's two basic needs. So if seaweed can fulfill these two basic needs in a way or another, that's so cool. And of course, you can use it for functional dress or for functional food. You can also use it for gastronomy or fashion, as you do. I think that's the same. I mean, they are all the same. And but to get to it, I mean, we need a lot of activism indeed, and we need some activist people. That's why I'm talking about a seaweed revolution, because it's a full mindset that needs to be broken. I mean, we have this wrong perception about seaweed, but the thing is that we are all activists. We are all environmental activists at the end of the day. I mean, each time we buy something in a shop, whether it is to get dressed or to get food or just either each time we click on something we like. I mean, we are environmental activists. We are. I mean, people are looking at what we are doing. We know that we live in a world that is fully connected now, and we are all connected to the same garment system, to the same food system, and people are monitoring what we are doing, what our choices are. And each time we drink and we buy something, we are environmental activists. 4 times a day, we are. I keep saying the same. We are environmental activists, and we shape the world we want. So let's do it all together, and we have to be activists. And we are all part of this revolution. You are leading the pack in terms of the fashion part. I mean, we are trying to support for the food part, but we are all working in the same direction, which is to give a different perspective to seaweed and make people understand that it is the greatest untapped resource we have on the planet at the moment, and that it can really address the generational challenges that we have.
Yeah, perfect. The perfect coalition between this
Exactly.
is with the coalition. This is exactly, you just summed it out perfectly. Perfect.
Exactly.
So my last question to you is, now this program is to do with an engaging and inspiring ocean. And you are an engaged and a very inspiring person yourself. So I
Thank
would
you.
like to hear from you, in your words, what does an engaging and inspiring ocean mean to you personally?
Well, it means we should once again reconnect land and ocean. This is not parallel system. This is not different system, and we should reconnect them. They work. It's a global ecosystem. So engaging, it should be connected with the land, because seaweed has the potential to clean the agricultural runoff, for instance, and they will provide compounds of interest for plants and for animals and for humans. So it's all a circular economy. And I think an engaging and inspiring ocean should be all a circular economy, but a regenerative one once again. We should stop this extractive aquaculture, this fishing industry that we have, which is in a predator. We are a predator in the ocean. So we should stop that. I mean, we should be managing the ecosystem. We should develop a permaculture in the ocean, a regenerative system with multi-trophic aquaculture that are regenerating themselves and that support the land, that support life on land. And I think that that's the way forward. And that's what is an inspiring and engaging ocean is to me. Totally regenerative, permaculture in the ocean, ecosystem services for ocean and for land. We have not been very good at telling story when it comes to the ocean so far. It is absent in most of the strategic discussion. There's no UN organization for the ocean, for instance. Why? What is there anything more international than the ocean? I mean, is there anything more cross-country than the ocean? But no, but there's nothing more. But there's no UN organization for this. So I think we have to tell stories. We are and art and food, and there's very good ways to tell story. And we need to inspire and engage people through the stories to reconcile land and ocean and make them work all together to sustain a world of 10 billion people, because that's what it will be at least. So, and to sustain and to feed and dress these people in a safe and sustainable way, which will also mitigate climate change, which will restore biodiversity and support livelihoods, and notably women. That's the engaging and inspiring story that I have for the ocean.
Fantastic, Mr. Wasso. Nobody could have said it better. It was beautiful. I always learn a lot whenever I speak to you. So everything is really
Thank you.
inspiring. So you're going to be at the COP26?
Yes. We'll be
Okay,
pushing
good.
hard for this on the UN Food System Summit and the UN Ocean Summit as well. So yeah, we are pushing hard, and also with the private sector and the NGOs and the academics. We need and support primary production. Yeah, because things are not only happening in these UN meetings, and a lot has to be done on the ground and boots on the ground or boots on the ocean, I would say.
Yeah, so hopefully we can meet each other then. Hopefully everything should be clear.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
It was lovely having this discussion with you, and
my pleasure.
Looking forward to a lot more that can be done with seaweed, with the intersection with art, food, fashion, clothing, and the circularity and the systems that can be put into place. Thank you so much for taking this time and being a part of this really important event. And I wish the Seaweed Revolution and the Safe Seaweed Coalition all the best.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the best as well.